Do not skip this video. You didn't find this message by accident. If you're watching right now, there is a reason. Something has been trying to get your attention through situations, through delays, through discomfort, through things you can't quite explain. And this may be the moment you finally understand why. Right now, there are warning signs showing up in your life. Signs that something needs to change before it's too late. This message is not meant to scare you. It's meant to wake you up. Because sometimes warnings are not punishment. They are protection. And if you ignore them, you may miss what is trying to save you. Stay with this message. It could reveal exactly what you need to see right now. Sign 1. A persistent inner restlessness. One of the earliest and most subtle signs of a warning is not external. It is internal. Nothing dramatic may be happening around you. Life appears stable. Your routine continues. Your environment remains the same. Yet something within begins to shift. A quiet unease starts to form. Not panic, not fear, but a steady discomfort that refuses to disappear. You may try to ignore it at first. You tell yourself everything is fine. I'm just overthinking. This feeling will pass. But it doesn't. It lingers. It follows you into moments that once felt peaceful, into conversations that once felt easy, into decisions that once felt obvious. Suddenly, what used to feel normal begins to feel heavy. Places that once felt comfortable now feel draining. Habits that once felt harmless now feel questionable. Even success or progress may feel strangely unsatisfying. This restlessness is difficult to explain because it often lacks a clear external cause. Nothing has collapsed, nothing has visibly gone wrong, and yet internally there is friction. This friction is not always confusion. Sometimes it is clarity trying to emerge. It is the moment when your deeper awareness begins to recognize what your habits have normalized. You start noticing inconsistencies. You begin to sense misalignment. You feel tension between what you are doing and what you sense you should be doing. This is not merely emotional instability. It is often the quiet signal that something requires examination. Because restlessness disrupts comfort. It interrupts autopilot. It prevents you from continuing blindly. Without this internal tension, it would be easy to continue unchanged, to remain in patterns simply because they are familiar, to accept environments simply because they are accepted by others. But restlessness invites questioning. It creates distance between you and what once felt unquestionable. You begin to pause, to reflect, to reconsider. Why does this no longer feel right? Why does this choice feel heavier than before? Why does this environment now feel restrictive? These questions mark the beginning of awareness. Restlessness exposes a difference between routine and direction, between comfort and alignment, between acceptance and growth. It signals that something within you is no longer at ease with what surrounds you. And this discomfort is not necessarily destructive. It can be protective, because without restlessness, change rarely begins. Contentment can sometimes mask stagnation. Ease can sometimes hide misalignment, and stability can sometimes prevent necessary correction. Restlessness breaks that illusion. It brings unease where there was complacency, attention where there was assumption. It does not always demand immediate action, but it demands honesty about what feels wrong, about what can no longer be ignored. This inner tension is not meant to overwhelm. It is meant to awaken, to alert you before external consequences arise, to prompt adjustment before deeper damage occurs. Because warnings often begin quietly, not through crisis, but through awareness. And persistent restlessness is often the first sign that something within is asking you to reconsider your direction. Sign 2. Repeated obstacles. Another sign that a warning may be unfolding is the presence of repeated obstacles. You begin moving towards something with confidence. A plan seems clear. A direction appears promising. But then resistance emerges, not once, but again and again. Opportunities stall. Doors close unexpectedly. Efforts that once would have succeeded now seem ineffective. You adjust your approach. You try harder. you become more determined. Yet progress remains blocked. At first, this feels frustrating. You may interpret it as failure, as bad timing, as misfortune. But when obstacles become consistent rather than occasional, they invite deeper reflection, because not every barrier exists to be conquered. Some exist to redirect. Repeated resistance is different from momentary difficulty. Temporary difficulty challenges you to grow. But persistent obstruction often signals that a direction itself may be misaligned. The distinction lies in the pattern. A single setback may test resilience, but continuous obstruction may question direction. You may find that each attempt to move forward meets unexpected resistance, plans unravel, support weakens, momentum fades, and despite your effort, movement becomes increasingly strained. This does not always mean you lack discipline. It does not always mean you lack ability. Sometimes it means the path itself is not meant to be sustained. Obstacles can function as protection. They interrupt momentum before it carries you into something harmful. They slow progress toward outcomes that may appear beneficial, but carry hidden costs. Without resistance, it is easy to continue without questioning. Success can reinforce direction even when the direction is flawed, but repeated interruption forces pause. It creates space for reconsideration. You begin to ask, why does this path remain closed? Why does progress feel unnatural? Why does each step require disproportionate struggle? These questions shift focus from effort to alignment, because determination alone does not guarantee wisdom. Persistence is valuable, but persistence in the wrong direction amplifies error. Repeated obstacles invite examination, not of your worth, but of your trajectory. They challenge assumptions about where you are headed. They test whether your pursuit is guided by clarity or merely by desire. Sometimes what appears promising is not sustainable. Sometimes what appears attractive is not constructive. And without resistance, it would be easy to continue until consequences become unavoidable. Obstacles interrupt that trajectory early. They provide the opportunity to adjust before deeper commitment forms. This does not mean every challenge is a warning. Growth often requires effort, but patterns of resistance differ from moments of effort. When obstacles consistently block progress without yielding growth, they may be asking for reassessment rather than persistence. They shift the question from, how can I push harder, to, should I continue here at all? Repeated obstacles are not always punishment. They can be guidance. They narrow your path. They eliminate directions that would have led to strain rather than fulfillment. They create the opportunity to step back and reconsider before moving further. Because warnings do not always shout. Sometimes they appear as closed doors, not to frustrate, but to prevent you from walking through the wrong one. Sign 3, loss of peace. One of the clearest internal signals that something may be wrong is the gradual loss of peace. This does not always arrive as fear or panic. It often begins quietly. A calm that once felt natural begins to fade. Situations that once brought comfort now bring tension. Decisions that once felt simple now carry hesitation. Nothing dramatic may have changed externally. Your routine continues. Your environment remains familiar, yet internally, stability weakens. You may begin to feel unsettled without understanding why. Moments that once felt restful now feel restless. Conversations that once felt easy now feel strained. Choices that once felt aligned now feel uncertain. This loss of peace is not always caused by stress. It is deeper than temporary anxiety. It lingers even when circumstances appear manageable. Even when success is present, even when stability seems intact, it creates an internal friction that does not resolve itself through distraction. You may attempt to ignore it. You may tell yourself that it is temporary, that it will pass with time, but it persists because peace is often connected to alignment. When actions, values, and direction move together, calm tends to follow. But when misalignment begins, tension emerges. Even if the misalignment is subtle, even if it is socially accepted, even if it appears beneficial on the surface, peace begins to weaken when you move in ways that conflict with deeper conviction. when your direction drifts from what you know to be right, when habits form that contradict your principles, when environments influence you toward compromise. This tension may not be immediately obvious, but over time it becomes harder to ignore. You may notice hesitation where confidence once existed. You may feel fatigue in situations that once energized you. You may sense discomfort even in familiar success. This does not always mean failure. It may mean correction is needed. Loss of peace invites reflection. It asks you to examine where your direction may have shifted, where your actions may no longer match your deeper understanding, where your priorities may have become distorted. Without this signal, it would be easy to continue to accept misalignment as normal, to adapt to tension rather than address it. But peace resists this. It withdraws when coherence fades, not as punishment, but as invitation. An invitation to pause, to reassess, to restore alignment before consequences deepen. Loss of peace does not always demand immediate change, but it demands awareness. It asks you to listen to what feels unsettled, to question what once felt obvious, to consider whether your path still reflects your values, because peace is not merely emotional comfort. It is often the byproduct of integrity between belief and action. And when that integrity weakens, calm gives way to tension, not to harm you, but to alert you, because warnings sometimes arrive not through noise, but through the quiet absence of peace. Sign 4. Sudden exposure of truth. Sometimes a warning does not arrive through discomfort or resistance. Sometimes it arrives through clarity. You begin to see things you did not notice before, not because they were hidden, but because you were not ready to recognize them. Patterns become visible. Motives become clearer. Behaviors that once seemed harmless now appear damaging. What once felt trustworthy now feels uncertain. This exposure can feel unsettling because it disrupts familiarity. It challenges assumptions. It forces reconsideration of what was previously accepted. You may begin to notice inconsistencies in people you trusted. Habits you once defended now feel questionable. Choices you once justified now feel misaligned. This shift does not always happen gradually. Sometimes it occurs suddenly. A conversation reveals something unexpected. An event exposes a hidden pattern. A moment of reflection brings realization, and what was once overlooked becomes impossible to ignore. This clarity can feel uncomfortable because it replaces ease with awareness. It removes the ability to continue unquestioned. You can no longer see the situation the same way. You can no longer pretend that what was hidden is harmless. Exposure often precedes correction, because without recognition, adjustment is impossible. Truth disrupts comfort. It dismantles assumptions that maintain stability. It reveals influences that may have shaped your direction without your awareness. This can involve relationships. You may notice dynamics that drain rather than support, expectations that pressure rather than encourage, influence that shapes behavior in ways that conflict with your values. It can involve habits, actions that once seemed small may now appear significant. Patterns that once felt normal may now appear limiting. It can involve direction. Goals that once felt meaningful may now feel empty. Pursuits that once seemed promising may now appear misaligned. This exposure does not create the problem. It reveals it. It brings to light what was already present. And while this can feel destabilizing, it also provides opportunity, because what is unseen cannot be corrected. What is unrecognized cannot be adjusted. Exposure provides the chance to respond before consequences deepen. It interrupts complacency. It prevents continued investment in what may ultimately harm you. This moment of clarity is not meant to overwhelm. It is meant to awaken, to shift your understanding from assumption to awareness, to move from acceptance to evaluation, to transition from passive continuation to intentional choice. Sudden exposure is not always dramatic. It may arrive through quiet realization, a thought that persists, an observation that repeats, a recognition that refuses to fade, and once seen, it cannot be unseen. This is the moment where truth invites response, not through force, but through understanding, because warnings sometimes arrive not through difficulty, but through the sudden clarity that something is not as it seemed. Sign 5. Disruption of comfort. Comfort creates stability. It gives structure to your routine, predictability to your choices, and ease to your environment. When life feels comfortable, movement becomes effortless. You know what to expect. You know where you belong. You know how things will unfold. But comfort can also create inertia. It encourages repetition. It allows patterns to form that feel safe, even if they are no longer beneficial. And over time, what once supported growth can begin to restrict it. This is why disruption sometimes becomes necessary. Suddenly, familiar routines begin to shift. Reliable patterns weaken. What once felt stable becomes uncertain. Schedules change. Expectations collapse. Environments no longer function as they once did. This disruption often feels unwelcome because it removes predictability. It replaces ease with uncertainty. It interrupts habits that once made life manageable. You may feel unsettled, even frustrated. You may long for restoration, for things to return to how they were. But disruption is not always destructive. Sometimes it is corrective. Comfort can conceal stagnation. It can maintain patterns long after they've stopped serving you. It can keep you connected to environments that no longer align with your direction. It's C. And encourage habits that feel easy but weaken resilience. Without disruption, these patterns may continue indefinitely because comfort rarely invites questioning. It reinforces continuation. Disruption interrupts that continuation. It challenges assumptions about what must remain. It creates space to evaluate what has become automatic. This may involve relationships. Connections that once supported you may begin to shift. Expectations may change. Dynamics may weaken. It may involve routines. Habits that once structured your days may no longer function. Activities that once felt meaningful may lose their appeal. It may involve direction. Goals that once guided you may become uncertain. Paths that once felt stable may close. This shift can feel destabilizing because it removes the structures that once provided security, but it also prevents continued reliance on what may limit growth. Disruption exposes the difference between comfort and alignment. What feels stable is not always beneficial. What feels easy is not always constructive, and what feels familiar is not always necessary. Without disruption, it is easy to remain attached to what once worked, but no longer does. Disruption forces reconsideration. It invites adjustment. It prevents continued investment in what may no longer serve your development. This is not meant to create chaos. It is meant to loosen attachment, to allow new direction to emerge. Because growth rarely occurs within unchanged patterns. It requires movement. It requires adaptation. And sometimes it requires the interruption of what once felt secure. Disruption does not always signal loss. It may signal transition. An invitation to move beyond what was once sufficient, but is no longer sustainable, because comfort can preserve the past, but disruption often prepares the future. 6. A growing sense of urgency. One of the clearest indicators that a movement toward change is underway is the emergence of a growing sense of urgency among the population. This feeling does not arise suddenly or without cause. Instead, it builds gradually as people become more aware of injustices, inequalities, or systemic failures that affect their daily lives. Over time, what may have once been dismissed as isolated problems begin to appear interconnected, revealing patterns that are too significant to ignore. As this awareness spreads, patience with the status quo begins to erode. A growing sense of urgency often begins quietly. Conversations shift from passive acceptance to questioning. People start asking why certain conditions persist and whether they are truly inevitable. Issues that were once tolerated are now seen as unacceptable. This mental shift is crucial because it marks the transition from resignation to responsibility. Individuals begin to feel that inaction is no longer neutral. It becomes a form of complicity. As urgency grows, so does emotional investment. Frustration, concern, and even fear can become powerful motivators. These emotions push people beyond awareness into action. What once felt like distant or abstract problems now feel immediate and personal. The realization that change is necessary and that delay could make things worse fuels a collective momentum. Importantly, urgency does not always manifest as chaos or panic. In many cases, it appears as determination and focus. Communities begin organizing discussions, forming alliances, and developing shared goals. The language used in public discourse also shifts. Conversations move from someday to now. The future is no longer viewed as an indefinite horizon, but as something actively shaped by present decisions. This growing urgency often leads to increased participation. People who were previously disengaged begin to involve themselves in civic life. They attend meetings, share ideas, and seek solutions. This broadened engagement signals that the desire for change is no longer limited to a small group, but is spreading across wider segments of society. Another key aspect of this urgency is the recognition of time sensitivity. There is an understanding that opportunities for meaningful change may be limited. Delays are seen not just as inconvenient, but as dangerous. This awareness can lead to innovation and creativity as people look for new ways to address long-standing challenges. At the same time, urgency can create tension. Differing opinions about the best path forward may surface. However, these debates are often productive. They reflect a shared commitment to improvement. Even if there's disagreement about strategy, the presence of urgency ensures that these discussions remain focused on outcomes rather than avoidance. Ultimately, a growing sense of urgency transforms passive concern into active pursuit of solutions. It energizes movements, strengthens resolve, and fosters collaboration. Without it, calls for change may remain theoretical. With it, they gain direction and purpose. In this way, urgency acts as both a catalyst and a guide. It reminds individuals and communities that progress is not automatic and that meaningful transformation requires timely action. When people collectively recognize that waiting is no longer an option, they begin to move, not out of panic, but out of commitment to a better future. Sign 7, increased unity and collective identity. Another powerful sign that meaningful change is approaching is the development of increased unity and a stronger sense of collective identity among people. This shift occurs when individuals begin to see themselves not as isolated actors facing challenges alone, but as part of a larger group with shared experiences, concerns, and aspirations. A common understanding starts to form, one that emphasizes connection over division. At first, this unity may appear in subtle ways. People begin to recognize that the struggles they face are not unique to them. Conversations reveal similarities in experiences that were once thought to be personal misfortunes rather than shared realities. As these connections become clearer, empathy grows. Individuals begin to care not only about their own circumstances, but also about the well-being of others in their community. This growing awareness fosters solidarity. Instead of competing or remaining indifferent, people start supporting one another. Cooperation becomes more common than conflict. The realization that progress is more achievable together than alone strengthens bonds and encourages collaboration. This marks a shift from individual survival to collective advancement. Language often reflects this change. Words like we, us, and together begin to replace I and me. In discussions about challenges and solutions, shared narratives emerge, helping people frame their experiences within a broader context. These narratives provide meaning and reinforce the idea that unity is not only beneficial but necessary. A strengthened collective identity also encourages participation. When people feel they belong to something larger than themselves, they are more likely to engage actively. They attend gatherings, contribute ideas, and take part in decision-making processes. This participation deepens commitment and builds trust within the group. Importantly, unity does not mean uniformity. Differences in perspective, background, and opinion remain. However, these differences are increasingly viewed as strengths rather than obstacles. Diverse viewpoints can lead to more creative and effective solutions. The shared goal of improvement helps keep disagreements constructive rather than divisive. Symbols and shared practices often emerge during this stage. These might include common messages, rituals, or collaborative initiatives that reinforce group identity. Such elements serve as reminders of shared purpose and help maintain momentum. Increased unity can also reduce fear. Acting alone often feels risky, but acting as part of a group provides reassurance. Mutual support makes challenges seem more manageable. This sense of safety encourages bolder thinking and greater willingness to pursue change. At the same time, unity requires effort to sustain. Trust must be built and maintained. Open communication becomes essential to prevent misunderstandings. The commitment to inclusivity ensures that the collective identity remains welcoming rather than exclusive. Ultimately, increased unity transforms scattered concern into coordinated effort. It creates the foundation for collective action and long-term resilience. When people see themselves as kane, tied by shared goals and mutual respect, they become capable of pursuing meaningful change together. In this way, unity serves as both strength and direction. It aligns individual motivations with group aspirations, making progress not only possible but sustainable.